My worst nightmare. Thank you very much for watching. World News America is right around the corner with Laura, who's standing by. 10 o'clock news will be here for viewers in the UK. We'll see you same time next week. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.
I'm Laura Trevelyan in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. South African officials say the Omicron variant is driving a sharp increase in COVID infections. Their message: vaccinations are vital.
The real problem here is not a lack of vaccines, it's the fact that younger people seem very reluctant to get a jab.
Venezuela's healthcare system is collapsing. We have a special report from inside a hospital as doctors and nurses struggle with the impact of COVID-19. The shadow of a shutdown looms over Washington. Lawmakers scramble to agree on how or even if to fund the federal government. Plus, finding inspiration from an eruption. How Icelandic artist Jónsi turned the sights and smells of a volcano into an exhibit. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. Health officials in South Africa say the new COVID variant has become the dominant strain there, with cases spiking in the country. Infections have jumped fourfold in just the last week. Authorities also say the current vaccines may not be as effective against Omicron. Our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding has more.
It's summertime here in South Africa, but a shadow looms over the beaches and holiday season. A fourth wave of COVID infections is spreading fast, driven by the new variant.
Are you worried about this new variant, Omicron?
The new one? Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried.
We don't know what the new variant's like. So
what the symptoms are,
exactly.
how
we don't
bad the
know
symptoms
how
are.
it would affect us now, and it makes you really scared.
At their laboratory here in Durban, the scientists who first identified the Omicron variant are racing to unlock its secrets. And now the first hints are emerging of what the mutations on the virus mean.
I think the epidemiological evidence is that we think it's you're more likely to get reinfected if you had COVID before. So that is because of the mutations on the spike protein. We don't know much about transmissibility, but I think looking at the mutational formation, we think it may be more transmissible than even Delta. In terms of clinical problems, we have no evidence that this is a more severe virus than, let's say, Delta, Alpha, or even Beta.
That bears repeating. Although hospital admissions are rising sharply here, it won't be at all clear, at least for another week or two, whether the Omicron variant is more severe, more dangerous. In the meantime, above all in rural South Africa, another problem lurks: vaccine hesitancy. This builder tells a visiting health worker that he won't get a jab, even with the new wave of infections.
Do you find it frustrating, all these people saying no?
It is. It's very frustrating because we believe that if all of us have already vaccinated, we will be safe.
As this virus spreads fast now across South Africa, the real problem here is not a lack of vaccines, it's the fact that younger people seem very reluctant to get a jab, which is where these activists come in.
He's willing to go
trying to persuade the public in a country where so far only a third of adults are fully vaccinated.
The guy said they would like to go and take their vaccination after we had a talk.
Success.
That's a success, and we thank them by clapping hands.
One small victory, but South Africa has a fight on its hands. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Durban.
Meanwhile, Germany has introduced sweeping new restrictions on people who haven't been vaccinated. Only those who've been jabbed or recently recovered from COVID will be allowed in restaurants, cinemas and many shops. Outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel called the measures an act of national solidarity. In addition, lawmakers could decide in February whether to make vaccination mandatory nationwide. Germany is going through a fourth wave of COVID, with 388 deaths recorded in a single day. Here in the United States, President Biden is promising to fight the new variant with science and speed, not chaos and confusion, as Omicron has now been found in a third American state. The White House has a plan for the winter months, which includes booster shots for all adults, free at-home COVID tests that will be covered by private insurance companies, and tougher testing requirements for international travellers. Those coming to the US will have to get tested within 24 hours of boarding their planes. Well, joining us now for more on the global response to this new variant is Dr. Krishna Udaya-Kumar, Founding Director of the Duke University Global Health Innovation Centre. Welcome back to the programme. So the White House is leaning heavily on booster shots to try and combat this new variant. But in Africa, only about 10% of people have even had one dose of the vaccine. Is this the way to end the pandemic?
Eventually, vaccinations are going to play a critical role in ending this pandemic, but we're not going to get there just by focusing on boosters in high-income countries. What we need to do is really vaccinate the world, which means a real focus on places like many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where the average vaccination rate is only about 7%. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of doses that are needed to increase there. And at the same time, even though we have way more vaccines than we're using right now, even in the US, we have less than 60% of the population fully vaccinated. So we're still at risk even here.
Meanwhile, scientists in South Africa say that they're seeing a rise in reinfections with Omicron. What do you make of that?
Yeah, the mutations we're seeing in Omicron are potentially concerning, but it's going to take a few weeks until we really know the clinical and epidemiological implications. As we just heard a few minutes ago, it's not clear yet whether there's greater transmissibility or more severity of infection or potentially immune evasion. So we have seen with prior variants that people that had been infected in the past and recovered were more prone to reinfection, and that may be what we're seeing here with Omicron, but we don't know enough yet.
And France's top scientific advisor warned today that the surge in cases in that country is actually being driven by the Delta variant. So we shouldn't forget about Delta, should we?
That's exactly right. Exactly as we're seeing in the U.S. also, the great majority of cases are really still the Delta variant. The Omicron variant is in the horizon, but not dominant by any means yet. But we know that there are also other variants that we should watch for over time. But right now, it's still Delta that's dominant in the U.S., in France, and most of the world.
Do you think it's going to help the U.S. requiring international travellers to get a negative COVID test within 24 hours of boarding a plane?
I think it's a small step relative to where we were. Having vaccine mandates for travelers coming to the U.S. is a positive sign, making sure that we've got tests prior to boarding, but we are not putting in place the more onerous types of restrictions that we are seeing other countries, which include quarantines and mandatory testing on arrival. So it's not a foolproof means at all, but it is better than the prior version.
Dr. Krishna Udaya-Kumar, thanks as always for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now, the pandemic is putting a strain on healthcare systems worldwide. And for countries in crisis, it's even worse. Take Venezuela, where there's hyperinflation and political turmoil. Hospitals are crumbling, and many doctors and nurses are paid so poorly they can't afford to eat. Our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, reports now from Maracaibo, which has seen more healthcare professionals die than anywhere else in Venezuela.
¿Qué más que usted yo? Buenos días. Ya estamos listos para la batalla.
Ready for battle? It's a light-hearted quip from Pedro as he waits for his lift to hospital.
Por aquí.
But every day is just that, a fight to survive.
When the pandemic hit, it was dreadful for me. There was no transport, no fuel, nothing.
He's making the thrice-weekly journey to hospital for kidney dialysis. With constant power cuts, these streets are often plunged into darkness. And with no working lifts, there's only one way to the treatment centre on the 9th floor. The very same stairs are used to remove the hospital's dead. When the system's crumbling, there's little room for dignity. Dolores, not her real name, took us into the hospital to show us the conditions doctors work in. We had to film secretly, the doctor fearful of the consequences if authorities knew we were there.
People say going to hospital is like going to hell.
The reality is devastating.
Swabs just soaked in blood, just left there. Shocking.
For a health system already on its knees, the pandemic was another big blow. And at a time when it's needed the most, the doctors don't feel protected. We saw them trying to work out who to donate hospital gowns to without them being sold on. In desperate times, there's always someone trying to make a quick buck.
When I come into hospital, it always makes me want to cry. This hospital used to have everything. Now we have nothing.
The doctors have become collateral damage in this broken system, but were paraded as heroes in this year's celebrations for the city's patron saint, La Chinita. Most Venezuelans, though, have lost faith in medicine. In a country where so many have lost so much, people are still hoping and praying for miracles. Katie Watson, BBC News in Maracaibo.
Now to worries here in Washington that the US federal government could shut down this weekend if lawmakers can't agree on how to fund it. Earlier on Thursday, a deal was reached to extend funding through mid-February, but a group of Conservative Republicans in the Senate are threatening to force a shutdown over President Biden's vaccine mandates. Here to explain all of this is our senior North America reporter, Anthony Zerka. Anthony, I thought from having covered previous government shutdowns that they had gone out of fashion because voters don't like them, but apparently not.
Apparently not. The thing about kicking the can down the road is eventually you catch up with the can. And that's what's happened today and tomorrow with Congress facing the potential government shutdown. And because they put it off right up until when government funding may run out at midnight on Friday, it has allowed a small handful of Republican senators to gum up the works because they want to try to force some sort of a vote defunding Joe Biden's vaccine or testing mandate on companies that employ more than 100 Americans. So they're using this pressure point and they're making the most of it. And that's why we could be facing a government shutdown, even if it is only a temporary one.
But aren't there divisions in the Republican ranks, Anthony, about whether this is wise when they seem to be on a glide path to retaking at least the House?
Yeah, anytime you get a shutdown, you don't know what the political fallout's going to be. And very well, the American public could look and blame the Republicans for this if it stretches on for any significant amount of time. And also, it's a strange hill to die on. COVID vaccine mandates actually are generally popular among the larger American public. What these handful of Republican senators, Roger Marshall of Kansas, Ted Cruz of Texas, who they're playing to is not the general American public. However, they're playing towards the conservative base where they have more suspicion of the vaccine mandates. They view it as government overreach. And so they support their senators trying to block this. But, you know, people who are looking at the larger political viewpoint on this, I think they would much rather not have this fight.
And Anthony, what about President Biden's agenda? After Democrats did badly in those off-year elections in November, they managed to pass the infrastructure bill. But wasn't there another huge bill they were going to pass?
There is the Build Back Better bill, as they've called it. It still is up in the air. It passed the House of Representatives, but its future in the Senate is still somewhat unknown. There's talk about having it done sometime before the end of this year. But that, because it takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate, and the Democrats only have 50, they need this procedural trick to try to pass the Build Back Better bill with 50 votes. And so they're cramming everything into it, the rest of their agenda. And that means that there's a lot of negotiations behind it. Factions within the Democratic Party want more money or less money for things. These are taking time, and that is dragging all of this out much longer than I think the Biden administration would like, certainly.
Anthony Zerka, thank you for illuminating what is happening here in Washington, D.C. In other news now from around the world, Angela Merkel was honoured by her country's military on Thursday. She counts down to her final day as Chancellor of Germany. She told Germans to live life with a lightness of heart and be optimistic about the future. A punk anthem was played at the ceremony at the Chancellor's request. She officially steps down next week. Russia's foreign minister has warned that Europe could be returning to what he called the nightmare of military confrontation. At a security conference in Sweden, Sergei Lavrov expressed fears about US plans to place intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Europe. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that Russia would face serious consequences if it pursued confrontation with Ukraine. The US and Mexican governments have agreed to reinstate the Trump-era policy known as Remain in Mexico. This means would-be asylum seekers who cross the US southern border will be sent back to Mexico, waiting for a ruling on their case. US President Joe Biden had suspended the program, calling it inhumane. However, a court order forced his administration to reinstate it. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. Tech and taxis, as kidnappings in cabs are on the rise in the Democratic Republic of Congo, how two women have designed a safety app.
Come and walk where few have been, along paths yet to be charted. Come and see what you've never seen. Share memories you'll never forget. And feel a welcome you've never felt. Welcome to a journey you've never imagined. Welcome to Arabia, Saudi.
My name is Femi, and I've come really to find out more about the history of colonialism.
British-Nigerian poet and activist Femi Nylander is on a journey across West Africa, inspired by Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness.
I discovered savagery at the heart of Western civilization.
He uncovers the true horror of Europe's scramble for Africa.
This highway follows the exact route of the French colonial massacres.
Arena, Niger's Heart of Darkness, on BBC World News.
Safety on public transport is a concern for women all around the world, whether it's the subway in New York City or a bus in Delhi. And in the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, taxis are a popular but often dangerous way to get around. Victoria Rubadiri reports on the women with a tech solution to a global problem.
Kinshasa, one of Africa's megacities, is built on the banks of the Congo River. It has an estimated population of 15 million people.
Everybody is on the move, but the transport system cannot cope. Unless you have your own set of wheels, the only way to get around is in one of these taxis. But after sunset, you run the risk of getting kidnapped. And that's been happening here up to 5 times a week.
This route is where they usually carry out their operations.
Sarah was taken while on her way home from work.
Someone came from the back of the car. He grabbed me and said, "Don't move or you will die."
Not every kidnapping ends in a ransom demand.
They took the bag like this.
In some cases, passengers are stripped of their valuables and dumped in a dangerous part of the city. After deciding not to kill her, the kidnappers left Sarah here. It's the first time she's been back at night.
I really don't like this place. It reminds me of what happened here on that day. That image is still so fresh in my mind. Whenever I'm in a taxi or a bus and I see the driver turn in this direction, I get flashbacks to that night.
Sarah's kidnapping happened a year ago. At the same time, two entrepreneurs launched an app called Hoja. It's a growing database of drivers and their vehicles.
When I heard that people are getting kidnapped, even one of my cousins get kidnapped in the taxi, I was like, okay, I have a mission. How can we find a solution and bring safe, sustainable, affordable mobility to the population?
The app also had to be very user-friendly so that people could actually use the icons even when they couldn't read.
All right, so this is how it works. Pretty simple. Open up the app on my phone. Just hit the QR code scanner. Bring it up to the QR code. And in a few seconds, up comes the picture of the driver and the car, and you're ready to ride. That's it. Transport officials told us that in Kinshasa, kidnappings are now down from 5 a week to just 5 in the last 10 months. And nearly a third of the city's 60,000 taxi drivers have signed up.
Good for business because you know at the end of the day your car or your taxi is safe, and even the passengers in the car or in the taxi are safe as well.
Now, Hoja's overall success means there is the possibility of launching the app in other African cities. Until then, thousands of passengers still face a terrifying daily commute. Victoria Rubadiri, BBC News, Kinshasa.
An important idea. Now to an Icelandic artist whose work is inspired by the recent volcanic eruption in his country. Jonsi has a new exhibit in New York, which conjures up the experience through sound, sculpture and sense. He's been speaking to the BBC about his creation.
It's definitely been a weird time with all the lockdown stuff. I've been kind of stuck in America, and I kind of can't go back to see my family because I couldn't come back in again. Also, I was really sad not to see the volcano, and I feel like the main piece in the gallery is kind of inspired by that. Like, I really want to see it and experience it, smell it, and but I can't. I'm just like, okay, how can I create my own volcano? It's kind of based on two choir pieces, and then also there's like a pretty soundscapey kind of noise, and like if you would be inside the volcano. Music, perfumery, or any kind of art or something. I think it's all connects in some ways. I've just been surrounded by musicians, of course, all my life, but also artists. So I've just been kind of very curious about that. And also because I'm working in perfumery and music, that they're both invisible, but they kind of move you in some invisible way. Instead of being in a rock band, you go in and you have to play a show and leave. But now you can actually really control the space, curate the space, and decide all the little details and make it kind of really work for you. This is obsidian also, obsidian glass. I really like touching artworks, but when you go into the gallery, you can't touch anything. It's a beautiful color. I want to actually make more artworks you can actually just touch, I think, because that's such a good sense to trigger, I think. So yeah, next artwork is going to be smell, sound, touch, taste maybe. Then in the walls also here, we have invisible speakers. And also there's a bass under the bench also. COVID situation has been super weird in like every possible way, but I mean also for me, as everybody else, you can get some kind of peace and contemplation, being in one place for a long time. I have the scent component come out of the little tube here. People are really sensitive to it, so you need like very little to actually smell it. What I have here is actually in 1% solution. That's how strong it is. finally, now in December, I'm gonna go for a month, probably see my family, friends, and spend Christmas, New Year's, and finally gonna hike up to the volcano to see it and smell it.
The artist Jonsi. And before we go tonight, you know it's the holiday season when the lights on the Christmas tree in New York's Rockefeller Center are switched on. An 80-year-old Norway spruce took centre stage in Midtown Manhattan last night in a special TV broadcast. The 79-foot tree was decorated with more than 50,000 LED lights and at the top, a 900-pound crystal star. It's a welcome change from last year. As you may remember, there were a few concerns that the tree's health was reflecting pandemic life. It was looking a bit feeble. Here's to the end of 2021, and here's to 2022. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thanks for watching BBC World News America.